let's look at the story with a more concrete example. So I have a motion capture take here. It's pretty long, it doesn't start at frame 0, the character doesn't start at the origin, and he does this little like take and throw action several times. Like he replays, he talks to someone else on the mocap stage, and then he does the action once again. So I want to be able to chop the part that I'm interested in, put it in a separate take, align it to the scene, in short, do the first like mocap selection. So in the story mode, I'm going to right click on the bottom like section, insert character animation track. I'm going to select my character, which is called player. I can drag this in to see the options here for the weight, the blending, the track content. And I'm going to right click on my timeline and say insert current take. Be careful when you do that. First, check your layers. Here I have 2 layers. It created it automatically, so I actually have nothing on my anim layer. As I can see when I select the character in full body, there's no key at all. But still, when I'm going to do insert take, it still does a merging. And it asks me the merge animation from multiple layers will be inserted. So I can say, okay, so MotionBuilder automatically merges all your layers and bake and insert to the story your actual animation. But if you have a very long mocap take, like 5,000 frames or something, it's going to take a while for nothing because you probably don't have any key on your anim layer yet. So be careful and just remove that layer before inserting, and inserting will be a lot faster. So you can take the mocap take, the clip, and actually click the show hide ghost. And when you have the ghosting, it allows you to move the clip around in space. So I'm going to chop the part that I'm interested in here. So I'm going to use the razor. I have the shortcut Alt-R, otherwise you can crop by just sliding or using the razor icon here. You can delete that first part. Okay, maybe cut here again. And I'm going to go look at the second take, the second test. Delete what's in the middle. And keep that last part. You can see that now that I have 2 sections on my track, I actually see the ghost of the first one, the blue one. Right? And when I'm on the blue, I see the ghost of the second one. So if you don't see well because of the rig, you can hide the rig with these icons here. And in white, I see the ghost that's like the result of my story. So it's actually what's playing. And as soon as you go beyond your first clip, you'll see that it will pop and automatically show you what's going to come next on the next clip. Okay. So now I want to put those 2 clips in separate takes. So you can do it manually. So you want to maybe duplicate the take that you're in. So here I have my mocap. So usually it's good to keep your original mocap take somewhere and duplicate that. Call it maybe throw 01, start naming it with the name of the animation that you want, and throw 2. Okay. Now I'm going to go in the first one. I'm going to put that one, I'm going to put the blue clip at 0, so I can drag all the way to 0. If your timeline starts at 0 and you have your time slider at 0, it's easier because it snaps a little. Otherwise, you can enter a number on the top left and it's going to snap immediately. And now my timeline is still like super long, so I just want it to be the length of this clip, so I'm going to right click and say frame start end. Now remember that when I go beyond that blue clip, it's going to show me what's on the next clip immediately. So on that very last frame here at 98, sometimes it jumps to, here it doesn't do it, but sometimes it jumps to the next clip. So sometimes you just want to extend one more frame here So it goes beyond, and those are frames that you don't want, but it's fine. It's just to make sure that it doesn't jump and pops on the very last key of your timeline, on the very last frame. Otherwise, take that first clip here, and you can always like Control X or cut it and paste it before. And since it's before, it won't interfere with the mocap take that you're actually selecting. So now I have my throw one, and I can take my character and in full body, plot selected, all properties. So now what I have in my story is exactly what I have on my timeline. I'm going to go ahead and do that quickly for the second take. So I jump to my second animation, put it at 0, right click, frame start end, big plot. So I did it manually. Otherwise, usually I use a very cool script from Download. So I'm going to post the link to download it, and it's called Mobu Core. And there are some really cool options to directly bake your story clips into separate animations. And you can directly name them in the story. So window, you can use add asset settings, or double click on or triple click on your clip. And it's going to show this window, asset settings. And here you can rename it, so maybe I want to call it like throw 01 script, so we know that it's the script version. And same on the throw 2, I'm going to call it script. So now they have a certain name, and when I select them, I don't select anything on the player, I just select those 2 clips. I'm going to go to Mobu Core and say copy selected story clips to takes. You could also copy them to separate tracks, so it's going to add a track and like organize those clips in the separate tracks. And you can also ask it to center your text to the scene. But I personally prefer to do that manually, and we'll see how to do it after. So I usually select this option here. So that created 2 additional takes at the end of my track. It added a space 1 because there's a name conflict with the clips that are here in my story. So unfortunately, when you use this, you need to rename your takes. So you can right click rename, or you can select both, and they stack up in the navigator, and it's actually faster to double click and press backspace rather than right clicking every time rename. You can see that it's exactly the same take that I had here on the manual version. So it's a little bit faster to use that script. It's very, very sweet. So now my takes are like still a bit off-centered, so I can re-add them in the story. And I want to align the character to the scene origin. So I'm going to go in my side view, start on frame 0, and manually move my character so he starts like on the origin. I usually don't eyeball it because I don't want the pelvis to be exactly on the scene origin. I try to, like, I imagine there's a capsule around the player, and I try to eyeball more the center of mass basically. Same on the front, so it's pretty good here. Then I go to the end of the animation, and sometimes, you know, his trajectory may not be well aligned with the scene. So here he goes a bit to the side. It's not so bad, but you can see from the front view that he ends up a bit off-centered. So I'm going to take the rotation this time and reorient the take. So how it works is it actually pivots from the beginning of the take, like the position of the character at the beginning of the take. So it's going to pivot from my origin here. That's why it's better to first align on frame 0 and then align the end of the clip. And I'm happy with this. I can bake it. So now I want to animate my root control. Again, I can do that manually, maybe in body part or selection, delete all its keys, so the character still moves around but not the root. I'm going to to zero it out in the first frame, so it starts at the scene origin. I can manually animate it. Sometimes it's cleaner than just trying to bake it under the pelvis, because it gives you something that's a little more, a little smoother. Take those curves and make them all auto. Because in games, in lots of moves, you want the character to like start steady, like the root bone not moving during the first frames. Then you want it to kind of follow the character, but not one-on-one, so that from the camera perspective, it feels like the character is a bit detached from the root. And you can see that I only animate on the forward axis here, because I want the character to shift on the side a bit in screen space. So you can animate it manually, or you can actually bake it and then smooth the translation curve. So I usually have an option built in my rigs. In the master relation, for instance, I have a separate constraint that I call temp root bake. So this activates a point constraint. It's like that I call root bake, and it's my root constraint to both the last bone of the spine and the hips, and it's just constrained on X and Z, so just on the horizontal axis, as you can see in my constraint axis. So I ignore Y, otherwise it would be floating here in the air. So now my root is following the body. It's kind of following the center of mass, because I use both spine 2 and hips, so it's a bit more organic than if it was only locked under the hips, for example, because the character still shifts a bit in screen space, so it's not so bad. I can bake that. With this kind of root bake constraints, you can also, instead of baking, you can just decide to key throughout the animation. So I'm gonna key selected properties. In the F-curves, I'm only gonna select the Z translation, and I'm gonna key at the main bits. So maybe here, a bit further, 15. My animation is super short. And then just disable your constraint. And you'll see the result here. You have a smooth result. And let's say I still want to like tone down those curves. I can come in and use a filter to smooth them. I can also use key reducing. Maybe make that stronger. So now I only have a few keys. Make them auto. I'm gonna make sure the first keys are 0. Override their value. Maybe I only want to make the root start moving at frames 5 or 6 to give it some blend in time. Same for the last ones. I want the root to settle a bit earlier, and I want to make sure the root at the end comes back to 0 on the x-axis, so that the full motion of the character doesn't like make them go to the side in terms of root motion. Oh, and of course I don't see the result of my edit because my constraint is still active. So back in here, I'm going to deactivate my root bake. Now let's say I actually want to edit the timing, because the timing is a bit slow for a game action. I can come in and re-add the take. So if you have the take in the story mode and you have part of the character selected, it's going to show you the keys that exist on that character. So here it shows me keys on every frame. So I'm just going to look at the motion and start looking at where I can speed things up. So probably here when he moves forward, so I'm going to use the razor to speed up that part here, and then switch to the scaling mode and speed that up and then move that. So now the dash forward is a bit faster. Maybe I'm actually going to take like the entire portion of the clip and scale that up. So usually like scale up the entire clip or like speed up the entire clip, and then I refine this, so I recut and respeed up some parts. Maybe slow down some other parts. Trying to give more contrast to the timing and make it feel nicer than just the realistic mocap timing, which is a bit more continuous, a bit more even. And if I feel like some transitions are a bit harsh, sometimes I go back to cropping mode and I just extend like the transition between two clips on both sides. So there's at least one frame that's a bit in between and helps the blending between the different timings. Because of course here the timing changes in one frame every time. And maybe I want to crop the beginning because the beginning is a bit long as well. So I want to directly start where he starts moving here and cut the first frames. Maybe cut some of the last frames as well. Now, because I cut the beginning, you can see my root is not exactly at the scene origin anymore because I chopped the beginning and he was already moving at the beginning. So may not be obvious. I'm going to take all the clips and make it even more obvious and really offset the entire clip. So now you can see that my entire animation is a bit offset. So if I want to fix that, I should first bake everything, delete and re-add the current take. So now I have a clean, fresh take. I don't have the edit with all the timing anymore. So it's easier to fix. I can take my take, go in transform, and for some reason, sometimes it doesn't really understand where your clip starts. So you just need to refresh the story, leave the story and reset it. So now it understands that my take starts from here. I can go in and add 0, 0, 0. And you can see that my root is still not exactly centered. That's because when you do what I just did, 0, 0, 0, it doesn't center the root controller because the root controller is just a character extension. It centers the pelvis. So now, because my root is not right under the pelvis, which is totally desired, there's still an offset. So the root is still not at 0, 0, 0. So what I do is I look at the offset that's on my root. So here I have 1.25 and 1.72, and I just add the negative version of that here on the clip. So I subtract that offset, and now my root is actually at 0, 0, 0. So now I recentered my take, make sure my take was centered, and I have the new timing. So at that point my animation is almost ready to go. I may want to apply some filters on the whole character. So you can select all your controls by just clicking once in the viewport. If you have a group, you can also do like all controls, because when you click here, it selects everything you see in the view, but not the sub controls that are in the sub views. So maybe it doesn't select the foot properly. So that's why I usually have a all controls group, and I'm gonna go in the F curves, select all my curves, and just apply Butterworth at least once, so I know that there's no jitter coming from the mocap. Usually when I edit mocap, and I apply filters, I work on layers. I tend to have this IK blending profile, so I add IK blending rotation on the thighs. I add IK blending rotation on the shoulders, on the chest, on the head, so that all the edits that I do don't start inserting more jitter and instability, but try to keep the stability that's in the original mocap. Maybe I'm going to add some hand IK blend as well, either a partial or total. I do not usually add IK rotation on the elbows and knees, because that tends to break the articulations on the yaw axis, right, and break them like this. So, but of course you can adapt the setup. If the character is kneeling down, you may want to add some IK blend translation of the knee, and maybe reduce the IK translation on the heel and put some on the ball, right? The last part before getting it into engine would be to apply the idle pose at the beginning. So maybe you have a specific idle pose that you stored in your pose controls. So usually you want to apply that on the layer. Select the root, so you apply it relative to the root. I'm going to key in full body. I'm going to do it at the end as well. Actually, my root is not exactly at 0 here on the x-axis, so I'm going to fix that. Maybe you want a certain translation as well. Maybe you want a precise value, so I can always put like 150, for instance, a round value, and assign the pose here. So the character actually moves forward a bit more than in the original mocap. And I usually make those keys of the first and last key flat. And of course, because you applied a pose at the beginning and at the end, you start seeing some issues at the core of your animation. Maybe you have overextension on the legs. Maybe the intensity of the pose is not the same. So usually I come back, I refer back to my base layer, and I look at when does the animation starts being very specific. So here he's still kind of preparing, but okay, maybe this first pose is already quite specific, so I'm going to re-add a 0 pose on my layer, a 0 key, to be back to the original mocap data. And I'm going to look at until when is the animation very specific, maybe here, keep a 0 key here. So during this portion here, which is the core of my animation, it's still the base layer. And then the last portion blends back to idle, and that first portion blends from idle. And maybe I want to be more subtle, and actually the player should start blending into idle like sooner than the last pose. So I usually take my last key and copy here. So you can see that the energy of the last pose starts coming back. Same here, I can also key here and move it forward a bit. So I do it roughly at first on full body, and then I'm going to go in and be more subtle and maybe have the head blend to the idle faster. Maybe I'm going to delay the arms and do like a limb by limb approach. And usually I'm also going to come to the 0 poses that I had here and here and start tuning them, because I want to keep the energy from the base layer, but I also want to make sure it looks clean, so I would, maybe reduce that bending of the chest here. Maybe move the shoulders forward, start posing the fingers, editing, right? So I would maybe accelerate some of the in-between poses as well. Make them a bit more clear, especially when seeing them from the back view, or from afar, making sure my negative spaces are clean and interesting. If there's a prop, I would clean the contact with the prop. Again, if I end up on a weird pose, I want to add a 0 key and see how it was on the original layer. So remember I applied the idle pose at the beginning here. And my foot are not exactly positioned the same as on the base layer, right? And so when he moves forward on the base layer, his right foot remains planted until he pushes off and then brings his foot forward. So there's a moment where the foot is actually interpolating between his first position and like the position during the throw. Same for the left foot. It's here, it lifts off and then moves forward and plants at a certain time, which is not exactly where I have my full body keys here. So when I reactivate the anim layer, I can see that the feet tend to like maybe slide a little. Like if I had a more obvious offset on the front foot, you would understand better. Is that here, see that there's some sliding happening at the very beginning. And here if I have a key like that's far away, you can see that it's still sliding here. Compared to the original layer where here it's like fairly stable and then it plants here. So again, so I want to make sure that I hold my idle pose until the foot like lifts, and then I only apply my edited pose or my 0 pose, my 0 key when it plants. So I can do it by turning off the layer. Here I know around that frame that I want to keep the offset coming from the initial key. So I'm going to copy paste that, delete the one that's here, and here I'm going to take maybe the next key or key here and delete the key that's in between. So I have my interpolation between, you can see it here on the layer, between my idle pose. I hold that, not the exact pose, but the offset. I hold it until the foot lifts, and then here it plants and comes back to the 0 offset. May not be obvious, but I actually remove some sliding with this technique. So now I don't have the sliding anymore, it only starts moving when the foot was moving on the original layer. And I can do the same at the end. Disable the layer, look at when the foot like repositions. And when it plants. Take my last key, copy paste, delete what's in between. Do the same for the right foot. So my right foot comes in position actually fairly early, then it doesn't really reposition. So I'm going to copy paste the last key, and I'm going to take maybe this key here, or move it forward maybe. Okay. And if that creates some overextension because the pelvis is like too far away, you can either like edit the pelvis manually, or you can use, or you can maybe in extreme cases edit the foot and have an in-between pose on the foot where it's actually lifted like this. Or you can use the IK pulling to kind of pull or you can use the IK pulling to pull down the leg and try to like force the pelvis to go down to respect the rotation of the calf. There's another script that's very useful to clean up the feet interpolation when you apply poses on the layer. It's called Adjustment Blend. So on my first frame, I'm going to reapply my idle, same on the last frame, and when the core of the action starts, I'm going to put a 0 key on my layer. Same when the action is still like specific. So now I have very long interpolations into my idle pose, and you can see that that creates the foot sliding, especially here on the recovery. Usually I first duplicate my layer in case something goes wrong and I want to get rid of the effect of the script. So I duplicate my layer and I disable the first one. So I'm going to apply the script here. So I just have my character selected and I'm going to click Adjustment Blend. And what it does is it looks at the base layer, and when the feet move on the base layer, and it adjusts the keys you put on the layer to actually hold the foot plants for as long as they should, and only lift the foot when it's moving in the base layer. So it does everything we've been doing automatically. It's just very nice to also know the manual technique when you don't have the script, or in case the script just goes too far. So usually with this I'm going to put some IK pulling to make sure I don't overextend the legs too much. Maybe lower the hips as well. And sometimes I just bake the result of the script, of the adjustment script, on the lower body, so hips and legs. And then I disable that and I re-enable my original layer so I can fine-tune the upper body to my liking and maybe make the transition a bit smoother on the upper body.